now, programming from the Illinois Channel, an independent, nonpartisan corporation formed to provide nonpartisan coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois. For more information on the Illinois Channel, please visit our website at www.illinoischannel.org.
Just ahead, we talked to Rob Carr, the president and CEO of the Illinois Retail Merchants Association, about the effects on businesses from the new tax on sweetened drinks in Cook County. Then in about 20 minutes, Governor Rauner is joined by Representative Grant Worley and State Senator Michael Conolly as the governor signs a bill that will prevent the so-called double dipping of pensions by law enforcement officers. Later, Governor Rauner takes questions on his recent firings of members of his communication staff and the ongoing legislative battle over the school funding formula reform. Following that, in 45 minutes, Senator Dick Durbin speaks at the City Club of Chicago on how to prevent gun violence in the city, as well as President Trump's comments on the Charlottesville tragedy and other local and national political issues. Then in about 1 hour and 30 minutes, we talked to Senator John Curran of Downers Grove, who was recently selected to replace Senator Christine Radogno, following the Senate Minority Leader's resignation. And finally, in about 1 hour and 35 minutes, Lenny Jarrett, the project manager for the Center for Transforming Education at the Heartland Institute, explains why his organization is in favor of the SB1 school funding formula reform bill. That's all just ahead, after a brief word from one of our advisory council members.
The Illinois Channel salutes our advisory council members, leaders in business, education, law, medicine, and other fields from across Illinois.
Hi, I'm Jason Leahy, Executive Director of the Illinois Principals Association. Education has never been more challenging in Illinois than it is right now, with comprehensive education reform recently passed by lawmakers and our state's financing of education remaining under pressure. That's why the Illinois Principals Association acts to represent the needs of students and our members. We keep our principals up to date on changes in the law affecting education policy, and we advocate to keep our schools safe and to maintain a healthy environment conducive to learning. With all the changes happening in every field and with the ongoing financial problems facing Illinois, it's vital we all know about changes affecting our lives. That's why the Illinois Principals Association is proud to be a part of the Illinois Channel's advisory on education. Their coverage, whether that of key lawmakers discussing changes in education, an interview with the Illinois Budget Director on the state's finances, or the one-on-one interviews with those working in education, all help to keep citizens across the state connected to the real issues that impact the education of our children. I'm Jason Leahy, Executive Director of the Illinois Principals Association. I'm also proud to say I serve on the Illinois Channel's Advisory Council. The Illinois Channel, it works for all of us.
Next, from Springfield, we talked to Rob Carr, the president and CEO of the Illinois Retail Merchants Association, about the effects on businesses from the new tax on sweetened drinks in Cook County. This runs about 20 minutes.
Rob Carr, thanks for joining us again on the Illinois Channel.
Thanks for having me. Good to see you, Terry.
As we are here in the August of 2017, it's unusual that we would have the legislature in, but they're still in. And one of the issues also that has been percolating is of recent note has been something we talked about in the past, which is the soda tax in Cook County. Before, when we were talking about it, you were opposed to it, but now it's been implemented and started, the beginning of the month, the beginning of August, hasn't it?
Yes, it was scheduled to start July 1st, but due to court action, it didn't start until August 2nd.
You had raised in a previous conversation a number of alarms about how difficult it would be to implement as well as the cost. It's early on, but what do we know now that it's been implemented for some 3 weeks approximately? How is the experience for the retailers?
Well, first, let me start here. It's not just soda. It's sweetened beverages. So it applies to a whole lot more than soda. It gets into anything that has any sweetener, including non-caloric sweeteners, so artificial sweeteners. So it includes diet drinks of any kind, but anything that's been sweetened, it includes. What we know is it's causing a tremendous amount of confusion still. We know that all of the things that we warned about from last November when the county initially introduced and passed it to today. Many of those concerns have come true. We know that retailers have been sued over compliance issues, which is what we worried about because of the confusion, because of many last-minute changes that the county implemented through their rules process. And we know that sales are being shifted from out of Cook County to border areas, and that is really impacting negatively the viability of retailers in Cook County.
What were some of the last-minute rules that they implemented that's causing the confusion?
Sure. So they introduced and passed the tax in last November. Prior to that passage and since that passage, we had told them a number of issues, one of which was that they were out of compliance with the federal rules on SNAP. We worried about how retailers could
And by the way, SNAP, for those who don't speak, this is...
Sorry, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. It's exactly what it's...
The food stamps is what people would normally think of, right?
link card, but that's exactly right. The old TANF.
And the federal, you're not supposed to be taxing products sold through the SNAP program.
Correct.
Is that correct?
You're not supposed to tax. Those benefits are not supposed to be used to pay tax. And the way that the county had structured it, that is what was going to happen. The county kind of waved their magic hand and said, well, you just have to deal with it. But we had that significant issue as well. There was an issue raised by the Liquor Control Commission, which has yet to be addressed, that their ordinance may be violating the of value restrictions under the Illinois Liquor Code. That means that under the Cook County ordinance, if a retailer makes a sale of a sweetened beverage that should not be taxed to the consumer, they have to get a refund from the distributor that provided the product. The problem is a distributor who is also distributing liquor products is not supposed to provide anything of value back to the retailer. It's a one-way transaction. So that has yet to be addressed. There were issues over the definitions, exactly what products it applies to, how it's supposed to be measured, what you do with ice in cups, what you do with self-serve situations. So there were a number of issues that caused confusion.
These are basic. It goes to show you how just simple are things. Ice in cups. So if you have a 16 ounce soda,
correct.
Is it 16 ounces if you have ice in the cup is the question.
Pursuant to the county's interpretation, it is 16 ounces regardless of how much ice is in the cup. Whether the customer puts it in there or the retailer puts it in there, you're supposed to charge by the ounce that will fit in the cup. So 16 ounce would be 16 ounce. Our concern is that raises potential lawsuits against retailers for what's called the False Claims Act. That is, that it is not the proper application, the proper tax is not being collected. We have seen them sued for following the rules under the state's retail occupation tax on shipping, and we see the same sort of scenario being set up here. Thankfully, one hasn't been filed yet, but attorneys are creative, and we suspect we'll see some soon.
And you said, I believe, 3 retailers are being sued?
So I think it's up to 5 now have been sued. That is over the question of whether or not a product was taxed that should have been, was taxed that should not have been taxed. One of those suits so far has been dismissed against McDonald's because the tax was properly applied. But again, it goes to the confusion. Even the consumer can't understand how this is supposed to be calculated. So that causes confusion for everyone. It just violates the basic principle that a tax should be clear and understandable for everyone, including the consumer.
And that goes to a point I was going to make. Without getting lost in every single weed of this story, there's a number of different things. But what does it say just about government and business? And here you are representing the retailers. When we have a proposed tax that on the face of it may sound simple to begin with, but as we've just been discussing, the implementation of it and the unseen consequences of it cause such disruption to the business community who are they're trying to make a living. What does it say about that interaction of government and the people they're governing to have a tax like this go into effect? And I should point out that while so many times we talk about Democrat versus Republican, this is not really that kind of an issue. We have a number of people on the county board who are, I believe John Fritchie is one of them, who are opposed to the tax and have come out and tried to get it repealed.
Right. I think that's important to go back to how this all came down, right? I mean, this has been controversial since the day it was introduced. It passed. It had a tie vote in the county board, 8-8, and President Tony Preckwinkle had to cast the deciding vote in favor of it. It was her proposal. She cast in favor of it. That hardly ever happens. So it was born in controversy. Much of that controversy continues to percolate. When we sued over some of the questions that we've already discussed with the lower court, and they put a stay in place, the county ordered 10% cutbacks, well above the cutbacks that they needed for the amount of revenue they said they were going to raise from this. County commissioners pushed back on both parties, Democrat and Republican, to President Preckwinkle, saying you don't need that much cut, and there are other ways. You don't need to cut it all. There are other ways to do this without laying people off. So this thing has been born in controversy from the start. The problem is we have worked as an organization for decades successfully with government, whether we agree with something or not, to make sure that if it's going to happen, it happens correctly. The unfortunate pattern with the county has become they don't care. They simply say this is what we're going to do, and you live with the consequences. That's an unconscionable way to conduct business.
Who do you blame for that? I mean, is that Tony Preckwinkle's administration? Is it just the bureaucracy that's built up in the Cook County government that doesn't care because they maybe think they don't have to answer to anyone?
Well, I don't have the email that says exactly who to blame, but at the end of the day, the buck stops with the Cook County Board President, and staff answers to her. Now, if she's got a problem that people aren't giving her information, that is a problem that she should deal with. If it's coming from her, that's a problem that she should deal with. But we should all be about making something work, whether we agree with it or not. We can fight about the policy, but the mechanics we shouldn't fight about.
Where is the fight now? Are we looking to try to have this rescinded and say, look, as we predicted, this is a train wreck. You can't enforce it. It's just too many variations, too much complications. Is that the game plan, or is it just to try to make these details understandable?
Well, it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. First, we have a responsibility to try to make the details understandable, a responsibility to our members and to the retail community, and we continue to try to do that, even though without the cooperation of Cook County. But several Cook County Board Commissioners have introduced, or are going to introduce, an ordinance to repeal the tax. The tax has become so controversial and unpopular. Something like 87% of likely voters in Cook County have stated they're opposed to this tax. That now Springfield has taken notice, and legislators are worried about the pushback on them. So we've had two bills introduced here, one by Representative Michelle Mussman, a Democrat, and one by Representative Michael McAuliffe, a Republican, and they have a number of co-sponsors to repeal the Cook County sugar-sweetened beverage tax or sweetened beverage tax and prevent them from introducing a similar tax in the future. So it's playing down a number of tracks, as well as the fact that our lawsuit is at the appellate court level right now, and we would expect a decision on that sometime in October.
And what is that suit alleging?
Well, the suit alleges a number of things. First, that it violates uniformity clause. The tax applies to beverages that are essentially prepared. They come out of fountain drinks with syrup. They are in a bottle, but that doesn't apply to the identical drink that's made by hand. So somebody that can get a sweet tea at a McDonald's or their restaurant of choice out of a machine is taxed. Someone who orders a sweet tea over the counter at a coffee shop is not taxed for the same drink. That's one thing. The other thing is about vagueness, the fact that it didn't comply with SNAP rules, the fact that it didn't comply with the retail occupation tax initially, the fact that it might violate the Illinois Liquor Control Commission regulations on a value. There's a number of provisions under the vagueness article that we are contending need to be addressed.
And I know it's early on, but there was a report, one of the national networks had a reporter, and he stood in the middle of the street where the Cook County line ends, and he says the restaurant on this side has to collect the tax, the restaurant on the opposing side of the street does not. You alluded to that. How, and it's early on, but how much are those restaurants being injured by that tax, where people are saying, even though it may not be a whole lot of money, it's probably just, it's gotten consumers' ire up that they are saying we're just going to go outside of Cook County to go to a restaurant.
Sure. So we're getting anecdotal. We're starting to get data in. And as you noted, it's only 1 month. It's not even a month yet of data. But we're seeing fall off along the border of over 50%.
Wow.
And keep in mind, it's not a little bit.
Is that 50% of total sales or just
50% of this category? And remember, this category isn't just soda. This category is anything that has a sweetener, juice, coffee drinks, teas, sport drinks, soda, anything, lemonade, anything that has a sweetener in it is taxed. So it's a very broad category. And at least in the grocery industry, you're dealing with an industry that has a net profit margin of less than 1%. So anytime you take 50% of a category that big and move it, discourage it, and ship the sales elsewhere, which is what is happening, that's a real problem for the viability of that business.
And I would think in a restaurant like a McDonald's that probably a lot of their profit would come from something like a soda.
I think it absolutely would.
It's probably more of a higher profit margin. So when people, and maybe a burger, and so when you take that away, that can have an impact much larger than just the loss of a dollar soda.
Absolutely. And if I can shop at this restaurant on this side of the border in Cook County, or I can move even, a mile away and get it over here without the tax, I'm going to go the mile away and get it over here. And we're seeing upticks along the borders in the non-Cook County areas where there's significant upticks in sales in these categories. This is mirroring exactly the Philadelphia experience. Philadelphia is reporting the same sort of numbers, the same sort of upticks, and Philadelphia has been in place since January. So clearly it's not just a temporary anomaly. These are continuing to happen. And they result in layoffs. They affect not just the retailer and their employees, but they affect the distributors and their employees, and ultimately the manufacturers and their employees. So it works its way down the chain. So it's a real problem going forward.
Have you, in the legislature's effort, as you alluded to, Representative McCullough and Mussman, have you talked to the Speaker's office? Do we know where the Speaker stands on this?
Well, I would not know where the Speaker himself stands on it. Clearly, we have spoken to staff on both sides, including the Speaker's staff, as these issues have been introduced and arisen here, and we'll continue to. But I wouldn't know what the Speaker's personal position is.
And what was the purpose of the tax? Was it to balance the county budget, or I hear different things? I hear that, and I hear that it's for health purposes. But then there was just subsequent to this passing reports that then Cook County President Preckwinkle gave bonuses and all kind of expenditures where she raised spending, some would say dramatically, on labor costs.
Yeah, so that's an interesting question, because the argument, it was all about health. This is what it was. She was supposedly doing this because of health. But all of the defense since then has been about revenue. If it was about health, their budget wouldn't be so fragile that she would order a 10% cut because she missed 1 month of revenue because of the court-imposed stay. Even the lower court judge, who initially ruled against us on some of the counts, said it's preposterous that this is about health. This is all about revenue. In an interview that Cook County Board President Preckwinkle did yesterday with another media outlet in Chicago, she tried to tie the health argument in, but it was all about revenue. She said they chose a item to tax, or a category to tax, that would raise revenue and have other benefits. It's always been about revenue.
And then again, as I said, if it's about revenue, then why all of a sudden dish out these bonuses and increases in spending for some of the different employees of Cook County, which follows immediately?
That's a disturbing pattern that's emerging here as well, right? She has earned some praise for some of the steps that she has taken to try to bring Cook County's fiscal house in order. And I would tell you that I think she deserves some of that praise. I think some of it is because others similarly situated haven't taken the steps, and so she looks favorable by comparison. But there's a disturbing pattern here. When she reimposed the highest sales tax in the nation among major cities to 10.25%, a tax she had run on cutting and initially cut and then reimposed, she said she needed all the money for pensions and payment backlogs. Immediately after passed, she spent $130 million on salary increases that she hadn't told anyone about. Now we see that they've just had this sweetened beverage tax imposed, and now she's agreed to another contract that provides additional raises and has no savings on health insurance and other perks in it that cost the county additional money. I think that's where her fellow county commissioners on both sides of the aisle have raised objections as well, as to what they're really doing here. Is this really about being fiscally responsible, or is it about something else?
You know, I would say a number of people watch the Illinois Channel around the state might go, well, you know, I don't live in Cook County, so it doesn't impact me. But as we saw this come to Illinois from where it's been tried in other cities, as you've mentioned, Philadelphia, I think you said, it could be it could be applied elsewhere. But obviously, it impacts a whole lot of people relative to the state of Illinois, just in Cook County, as well as the economy, the whole business climate in that region. As we close out, looking forward, what's the timeline of events that you see this? I think you said the lawsuit that might be heard in October. Is that right?
We expect a ruling on the appeal sometime in October. Both sides have agreed to an expedited hearing process that the court has granted in that lawsuit. I don't know exactly what the time frame will be for the Assembly in terms of their consideration of the two bills that are in front of them. That could happen in the fall veto session, or it could happen next spring, or not at all. You know, you just never know what will happen in the legislative process. And then we'll see what happens with the Cook County introduction to repeal the tax.
The board could vote to repeal it.
The board could vote to repeal it. She has vowed she will veto it. She has vowed that she's going to stand by this tax, and we would need 11 commissioners to override that. Now, again, with 87% of likely voters saying this affects their decision, I suspect the county commissioners are paying extraordinarily close attention to those type of things.
And with just 3 weeks in, and you already have 5 lawsuits, who knows how many other lawsuits will be in place by the time we get to in October.
I saw somebody describe this as if somebody shook up a can of soda and handed it to her and it exploded when she opened it. And this has just been the issue that just has a twist and turn everywhere we look.
Rob Carr, it's somewhat complicated, but it's interesting that people often don't pay attention to politics and political matters, but when it affects something as basic as ordering a soda at a hamburger place, it gets their attention. We appreciate you taking the time to explain it.
My pleasure, Terry. Thank you.
Next from Naperville, Governor Rauner is joined by Representative Grant Worley and State Senator Michael Conolly as the governor signs a bill that will prevent the so-called double dipping of pensions by law enforcement officers. Later, Governor Rauner takes questions on his recent firings of members of his communication staff and the ongoing legislative battle over the school funding formula reform. This runs about 25 minutes.
Stick around after this event and enjoy all the opportunities for shopping and dining that downtown Naperville provides. Our local economy could certainly use the bump. HB 418 is a pension bill that starts to address our ever-growing pension liabilities. Anyone that follows state finances and state politics understands the effect of the ever-growing pension liabilities in our state. Depending on who you listen to, it's either $130 billion of unfunded pension liabilities or $250 billion, up to $250 billion of unfunded pension liabilities. So as those liabilities are growing, local units of government are seeing those dollars that should be allocated for other services going to fund pensions. That's crowding out things like teachers, first responders, salt for roads. So basic essential services are under increasing pressure to fund these pensions. Also, the taxpayers are under an ever-growing financial obligation to fund these pensions. So what HB 418 does is it stops the practice of what's commonly referred to as double dipping. Up until this bill is signed, a police officer could retire on a Friday, start a new job as a chief of police on a Monday, collect a pension, and then start working on a second pension. That has long-term financial implications that simply aren't sustainable, and this bill goes a long way to address it. I would like to point out that this bill in committee had bipartisan support. On the House floor, it received an almost unanimous vote and bipartisan support. I'd be remiss if I didn't thank the Illinois Association of Chiefs of Police for their support. They understand the pension crisis, and they were willing to come to the table and come up with a solution to a problem that impacts us all. In the Senate, the bill was picked up by my friend and colleague, who also represents Naperville. That's Senator Mike Conolly. Senator Conolly. I would be remiss if I didn't introduce Representative Mark Batnick. Representative covers southern portion of Naperville, and Representative Keith Wheeler is joining us here today, also advocates for pension reform. So with that, Senator Mike Conolly.
Thank you, Representative, and thank you, Mayor, for hosting this. Grant and I are both from large families, so when Grant said I've got a few brief remarks, that was as brief as Grant can be. Yeah, today is an interesting day. You can't win the World Series with a grand slam. Sometimes you have to get a single and a double and a sacrifice bunt and a sacrifice fly. 4 years ago, a large bipartisan group of legislators passed comprehensive pension reform, and the Supreme Court found it unconstitutional unanimously. So what we're left with, we have to find ways to navigate the Supreme Court, navigate the Constitution of the state of Illinois to really start chopping away at the long-term liabilities, and that's what this bill does. I was thrilled when Grant said, I want you to pick this up. I see people from the Naperville Area Chamber of Commerce who've been championing pension reform for at least a decade now, and it's constitutional and it's incremental, but it's an important first step. So with that, I want to introduce a person who's also been a champion of pension reform long before he ever got into this world of politics, our Governor, Bruce Rauner.
Thank you. It's wonderful to be back in Naperville. This is one of the best-run communities in the entire state of Illinois. You have been strong advocates for reform, for helping our taxpayers, for properly funding our schools, for creating more economic opportunity for everyone. I'd specifically like to thank the mayor, members of the city council here. Thank you for your leadership and your service. Appreciate you very much. This is an important bill. It's a step in the right direction, a very strong, positive step in the right direction. We want to protect our pension benefits. Protect our benefits, make sure they are there in full for folks when they retire. But we also want to make sure that the system is fair for taxpayers and is sustainable in the long run. We have to have a balance. Protect the benefits, protect taxpayers, and keep fairness in the system. The practice of double dipping was never the original intent of the law. It was never the original intent of our pension system. Collecting a pension, retiring, collecting a pension, and then immediately going back into the same service and earning a salary while taking a pension was never the intent. It's really not fair to many of the retirees who aren't doing that. It's not fair to taxpayers. And in the long run, it deprives money from both the pension system, so it can stay sustainable, but it takes money away from other critical services in our communities. It takes money away from public safety. It takes money away from our education system. It takes money away from social services and human services, the help, the money for our most vulnerable. It also takes money away from the pockets of taxpayers at a higher degree, and that takes away jobs from our economy. Hurts our small business owners who are creating jobs for the people of Illinois. So this bill is a good bill. It's a step in the right direction. It passed with strong bipartisan support. Strong bipartisan support. I'd like to thank the members of the General Assembly, Senator Conolly, and our representatives who are here. Thank you for your leadership. Appreciate you very much. On behalf of all the people of Illinois, this is a good day, and I look forward to signing this bill. Thank you. Any on-topic questions about pension reform or other issues? And while the leaders are here from the General Assembly, and after that I'll let them go aside and we can talk about other topics, other issues that folks would like to address. Any questions about this bill? Or?
What does this do for those people who are already collecting a few pensions or more pensions?
That continues. This is prospective.
Correct.
What is the relief that this bill offers? I mean, we know what the problem is. Does this prohibit them from taking the job?
No. They just don't start collecting the pension. They can take another job. That's terrific, but the pension doesn't start getting paid until they're retired.
Do they start earning another pension even
My understanding is yes.
So what happens is
there's
they
a
can
401.
collect Under this new law, the retired police officer can continue to collect that pension, but when they take a new job in law enforcement, they can now no longer get a defined benefit. They can get a defined contribution plan. So it takes away the double dipping from a pension standpoint, but it leaves open the ability for that law enforcement officer to negotiate with that community. Because during this process, we did hear from some of the smaller downstate communities that they like to hire these retired law enforcement officers. So it does allow them to sort of strike their own deal for a defined contribution plan and not a defined benefit plan for the second pension.
So they can or cannot get a second pension?
They can get a 401k style pension, retirement plan that it simply removes the option of a defined benefit plan for a second pension. It leaves it up to that local unit of government to negotiate directly with that new chief of police the terms of the retirement plan that they want to put together. From a financial standpoint, it provides budgeting and certainty for that local unit of government. They know their costs. On the upfront basis, they can plan for it and finance that retirement plan instead of the defined benefit plans. Units of government have a hard time coming up with what the actuaries say and how much they need to put in. So this allows a solid tool for budgeting on a go-forward basis.
But they cannot collect the pension if they go back to work. They cannot collect.
So this, because of the ruling that the senator spoke of from the Illinois Supreme Court, we were not able to do that. So they we can't diminish their pension that they've already earned. So they will continue to collect that. It just prohibits them from earning a second pension in a job. They're still in the same career. These chiefs still carry guns. They still have arrest powers. To me, they're still in active law enforcement.
Is there anything similar to other public employees, or is this just limited to police? What about teachers and other public employees?
Great question. Right now, this is just limited to chiefs of police. But this is a template on how we can do things on a go-forward basis, so I look forward to introducing similar language for other public service employees.
Questions on other topics?
Governor, who approved the statement that was put out that has caused so much angst for you? Did you see it? Did you approve it? And if you did not, who did? And why are they still perhaps working for your staff?
You're referring to an email that went out on Tuesday,
Yes.
Midday?
The white mail statement.
That email was sent with, I did not have knowledge of it. I did not approve it. And I, along with our senior staff, put out a subsequent statement to clarify.
Who did approve it?
Well, it went out from our senior communications staff. I believe it was drafted by Diana Rickard and sent out under email from Laurel Patrick.
Did your chief of staff approve it? Because we understand that would be normal procedure.
She did not.
Governor, why are you shaking of your head again?
There are some changes in our communications team. There are 4 folks who are not with us going forward. And we've put out a statement to that effect this morning. By mutual agreement, they're good folks doing good work, and I appreciate their efforts on behalf of the people of Illinois. Our efforts are never-ending to try to have the best team of people possible to serve the best interests of all the people of Illinois, and we are constantly trying to build the team. I'm sorry? Yes, we've announced some changes in the communications department, and that's all the changes there are.
Governor, what is your position on the IPI cartoon?
I have seen it now. I understand why some people would be upset by it. I hope we can together as a society, together as the people of Illinois, together as all Americans, that we can work to find common ground, work for justice, fairness, equality. And I'll say very strongly, that's one of the primary reasons I ran for governor. We have not had a fair system, a just system in Illinois for years. Why in Illinois have we tolerated for years the highest unemployment rate for African Americans? Why? Should we ever accept that? Why in Illinois for years have we had the worst funding for schools from a state government that has resulted in the largest gap between what low-income students receive per student, and most of those are minority students, and what high-income students receive in their schools per student? This system has been in existence for decades in Illinois. Many have tried to change it. We are succeeding. I believe we are on the verge of an exciting new day for the people of Illinois with a much more fair, just education system that has more equality in it. I am cautiously optimistic. I'm excited. The General Assembly is negotiating to try to come up with a good solution and compromise that embraces the new school funding formula that I support and that came out of our bipartisan commission. But again, these are stressful times. There is so much hostile rhetoric. There is so much pent-up emotion. And what I think is in everyone's interest is for us to come together, find unity, find common ground, work together, respect each other, listen, and work for justice, fairness, and equality. These are the principles that America's been built on, and we should work together to try to achieve that.
Governor, do you think that cartoon is racist?
I understand why some people are upset by it. And
Are you upset by it, sir?
I understand why some people are upset by it. My job is not to comment on every cartoon, every political statement that comes from outside our administration, and I will not do that. What I will do is fight every day for justice, fairness, equality, and we today are on the verge of historic change, both for economic opportunity as well as education fairness. And that's what we're fighting for.
In every cartoon, this is the Illinois Policy Institute that you have leaned on heavily for your staff overhaul until the new overhaul. But this isn't their first cartoon that has been viewed as racist by some. This is about the 10th cartoon. So that's why it's not just any cartoon.
As I said,
Continue to lean on the Illinois Policy Institute as your go-to think tank.
I have not leaned on them as my go-to think tank. That is not an accurate statement. I challenge the premise of the question. And I do have a few folks in our administration who used to work there. We have Democrats in our administration, we have Republicans, we have people from all walks of life and all backgrounds. A very tiny fraction of our administration is from that organization, and they in no regard, does that organization speak for me or our administration, and I do not lean on them for any particular issue or policy.
Governor, you talk about inequality in education. The cartoon, of course, speaks to that. It talks about, it has the white fat guy with a cigar, he's hiding tip money. So that message, do you agree with the principle of that message, and was it appropriate to deliver that message with a black kid begging a fat white guy for money?
Here's the issue that I have been talking about for years, and is part of my amendatory veto of the education funding bill. We have a TIF system, a use of TIF districts, particularly in the city of Chicago, that is excessive. It is beyond anything that's reasonable. The Chicago Teachers Union has criticized it extensively for years. I agree with the Chicago Teachers Union on their views. The TIF districts take a significant amount of money, in the case of Chicago, hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars every year, away from property taxes that would otherwise fund schools. And unfortunately, not only does it hurt children in Chicago, majority of whom are minorities, African American, Latino, English language learners, other immigrants, majority are disadvantaged students. It takes money away from them and creates funds that are used for other purposes. And again, there are reasons why TIF districts exist, and Chicago is not the only community in the state that uses them. But Chicago uses them at a pace that is 5 times more than the rest of the state. And that deprives money from our disadvantaged students, takes money away from the teachers in the classroom. And if that's a choice of the people of Chicago that they've made through their elected representatives, so be it. We need to respect that, local control. But we've set up an education funding system where the rest of state's taxpayers, suburbs, downstate, under the education funding formula, are forced to subsidize that decision. That's unfair, and that's what I exposed through my mandatory veto. We can see how unfair the system, how broken it is, how much money has been subsidized into Chicago from the suburbs and downstate. And again, I do not want to take money away from Chicago. I'm trying to get more money for Chicago. I've been an advocate for Chicago Public Schools improvement for more than 25 years. I have chaired or been on the board of virtually every reform organization for education in Chicago. And my wife and I have put our resources, time, and other resources into helping teachers, training, development, principal development, scholarships for low-income kids in Chicago, early childhood education for disadvantaged students in Chicago. I care deeply about Chicago, and I want to get more money for Chicago. The new funding formula does that. But we've got to deal with, and I hope we can find compromise, is a system where money is diverted from classrooms in the suburbs and downstate into Chicago's financial structure, which is broken. Yes.
Emmanuel challenges you on the TIF issue. He says that schools and libraries are the biggest beneficiaries in the city of TIF money. That's how they built new schools and libraries.
So if you read, I encourage you to read the statements that have been put out by the Chicago Teachers Union on TIFs and TIF money. I encourage you to analyze my mandatory veto and the financial impact of that. And you can go to illinois.gov/gov, illinois.gov/gov. All I did with my mandatory veto, primarily what I did, there's some other minor tweaks, but primarily did was have all school districts treated the same when it comes to TIF and PTEL and how the schools are funded. Just treat everybody the same. And when you can see the result, when that happens, and the money that would otherwise be diverted flows through the new funding formula, you can see where the money flows. Aurora and Rockford and Maywood and Harvey and Elgin and Joliet, communities that have high poverty. Frankly, many of those communities have higher concentrations of poverty, higher concentrations of minority students than Chicago does. And they receive millions of dollars or more as a result of my mandatory veto because they don't have extensive TIF districts that are funded at 5 times the level of Chicago. And you can see those results. The facts speak for themselves. Yes.
This is the second time this summer that we've seen a major shakeup of your staff, especially in your communications department. What is it about the communications department for you that is so...
Well, that's a great question. So the work that we do for the people of Illinois is incredibly difficult and very stressful. It's a burnout, high stress. It's hard on people's families. It's hard on anybody's life outside of public service. It's brutal. Now I volunteered for this, and I'm all committed to this. But as I say in many of my speeches, when I started this, I was 6'8" and had a full head of hair. I mean, this is really, really hard. But it's a noble mission. This is home. This is home, and we're all fighting to improve the future for our children and our grandchildren in our home. I am passionately dedicated to that. More economic opportunity, more education quality and equality. The communications effort is incredibly hard because we have attacks. We have political attacks coming 20 times a day. We have social media attacks coming 100 times a day. We have false rumors planted that have to be dealt with or responded to. We have legitimate questions from the media that deserve prompt turnaround and answering the questions to the best of our ability. It is really hard, really hard. And we need to do all that while also getting out the message about the positive changes that we're trying to drive and the wonderful work that we're doing on a bipartisan basis. Wonderful legislation that we've been able to achieve. More than 100,000 jobs that we've added since I became governor. The criminal justice transformation that we've achieved for Illinois. Illinois is #1 in transforming to the betterment of our criminal justice system, focusing on rehabilitation and drug addiction recovery and life skills so that we don't have repeat offenders. We are transforming Illinois for the better. Getting that message out while we've got the noise and the attacks and the false rumors, it's really hard. And getting people who can do it well and are willing to do it on the scale, it's a challenge. And we will always work to try to have the best team we can possibly have to serve the people of Illinois. We'll never give up on that. It's just a process. And we'll always work to just have great people who are willing to do it. And putting the best interest of the people of Illinois above all else. Because sometimes other things get in the way, or other loyalties get in the way, or other relationships, or other groups. Nothing should matter inside government for public service. Nothing should matter except moving forward to help create a better life for the people of Illinois. That should be the loyalty. Yes, sir.
Do you worry that all of this turmoil within your administration could undermine your leadership and hurt your ability to actually work out a compromise on SB 1? Or do you fear there could be Republicans who are looking at your administration and would bail on you and would support that override?
Well, let's say a couple things. First, I disagree with the characterization of turmoil. Change comes as part of any organization. We've had some folks with us since before I became governor. Some folks joined us in the first couple months and have been there since. Other folks have moved back into the private sector at various points over the last 2.5 years. It's just part of the process. I don't agree with turmoil. We've had some changes. A handful of people change. That's part of a process. Again, dedication to public service, dedication to putting the best interest of the people of Illinois first is what's paramount. That's where the loyalty needs to be. That's where our focus needs to be. In terms of SB 1, I am cautiously optimistic that the General Assembly is coming together to find a bipartisan compromise. Obviously, my hope and recommendation is that they would just support my mandatory veto. But as I've said, I'm open to any other ideas, any compromise, and any issue can be on the table. I believe the 4 leaders are meeting again this afternoon. That's my understanding. I've been in contact with leaders in the General Assembly and members in the General Assembly virtually every day for weeks. My only real disappointment and frustration is Speaker Madigan and his caucus held the education bill for 2 months, just sat on it, wouldn't deal with it, wouldn't send it to my desk, quietly sat on it, to wait till now to deal with this, to create a crisis. And that's not fair to our teachers or our school children.
Governor, to be fair, you made it a point that your effort is to bring in the best people. And
yeah.
After you lost with the budget veto override, there was a bunch of people who were gone. This whole cartoon issue that has created turmoil for your administration, we have a bunch of people gone. Does that undermine your leadership, and are Republicans going to perhaps bail on you on the SB 1?
I have tremendous confidence that members of the General Assembly will do what's right, put the best interest of our students first, get a system that is more just and fair and emphasizing quality. I am very proud of the members of the General Assembly who are trying to negotiate in good faith. Again, I will express my disappointment and frustration in Speaker Madigan and his management of his caucus and how he has held this school budgeting process, basically held it hostage for several months. Again, I would challenge the Speaker for his management of the budgeting process, forcing a tax hike, breaking the General Assembly to force a tax hike with no reforms whatsoever, and passing a budget that is still not balanced, still running deficits, and with no appropriations to pay down debt. No problem got fixed. In fact, the problem is worse. And it's essential we don't allow that to happen to our schools and our teachers and our students. Our students deserve better than that. I hope the members of the General Assembly will come together, bipartisanship. I hope they'll do it today. Come up with a compromise. What I believe is that the General Assembly will come to a good bipartisan compromise that's in the best interest of our students and narrow the gap between what low-income students receive so we have education, equality, justice, and fairness in a system that is sustainable for the long run and fair for taxpayers. Thanks very much, everybody. Appreciate it.
Hi, I'm Jim McNamee, President of the Illinois Public Pension Fund Association. Since 1985, we've worked to educate the public and those who serve as trustees on pension boards about issues that impact the financial health of publicly funded pensions. Our members manage over $18 billion in pension assets. That's a huge number. But we never forget those dollars belong to the men and women who've worked as firefighters, police officers, and as educators. We want them to know that their pension dollars are safely invested. They also want to know that someone will keep an eye on legislation that could threaten their pension. And that's why the Illinois Public Pension Fund Association is fighting against laws that would reduce the pensions earned by our members. And this is why we support the work of the Illinois Channel. Their unbiased, in-depth coverage of the pension reform issue allows us and our members to hear arguments on both sides of the pension issue, to follow legislation as it moves through committee, or to hear unedited interviews with key lawmakers as they discuss what changes are being considered. Pensions are very important. They're also very complex. Pension reform can't adequately be covered in sound bites. But the Illinois Channel provides a connection to the Capitol, the governor, and lawmakers that we all need to stay on top of key issues. Hi, I'm Jim McNamee, President of the Illinois Public Pension Fund Association. I watch the Illinois Channel, and I hope you do too.
Next, from Chicago, Senator Dick Durbin speaks at the City Club of Chicago on how to prevent gun violence in the city, as well as President Trump's comments on the Charlottesville tragedy and other local and national political issues. This runs about 45 minutes.
Jay, thanks for the nice introduction. Ed Mazur, thank you for the many kindnesses you've shown to me and my family. This is my first City Club without Paul Green, and I miss him. And I know we all do. A fantastic person and a great resource, and always had a little jab for every speaker with a tough question. I looked forward to it, and I'm sure you will, in his tradition, make sure I face the music afterwards, too. Donna Fenton there is one of my faves, and she and I went to, I remember saying, would you go to a Cubs game with me? Because she wears Cubs earrings, and she said sure, and we went to opening day a few years ago. And naturally, opening day at Wrigley Field, you never know what to expect. Well, it was a snowstorm, and we ended up in a box, and we were there with Billy Williams, and she got her picture taken. And I was sitting there watching the game, and I looked around, and darned if she wasn't waiting on everybody in the box. And I said, Donna, you're a guest. You don't have to work here today. But she's a wonderful lady, and glad to count her as a friend. And as I told the folks at my table, with Loretta's permission, she's my other girlfriend. So, Donna, glad that you're here. Topic I want to discuss with you this morning, or this afternoon, is serious. And I hope that each and every one of you will listen and share some thoughts, questions on anything that follows. But it relates to the reality of the world that we live in. Do you remember what you did last weekend? Some people do, and many people are scratching their heads trying to remember. 63 people will remember it because it was a weekend that they went to an emergency room with a gunshot in Chicago. Some will escape with a scar. Some will face surgeries and maybe brain damage, and some will face paralysis. For 8 Chicagoans last weekend, it was their last weekend on Earth. It was the deadliest weekend in this city since the longer 4th of July weekend a few weeks ago. So far this year, 2,435 people have been shot in Chicago. 454 have been killed. That's down from last year, Chicago's deadliest year in 20 years, when more than 4,300 people were shot in that year and 789 killed. But it's still horrifically high. No one is spared from this violence, not even children. Last year, more than 300 children in Chicago were shot. 36 died. So far this year, 176 children have been shot and 27 have died. This past June was the deadliest month for children in Chicago in more than 15 years. One child being killed on average every other day. Since 2000, gun violence in this city has taken the lives of more than 1,000 children. In his frustration and anger on Monday morning, Police Superintendent Eddie Johnson said, "This weekend of killing represents, quote, the culture of Chicago." He added, "We cannot arrest our way out of this crisis when the criminal justice system is not a deterrent." The causes of this carnage are complex. Many people are working from every conceivable angle to end it. Faith leaders, many represented today, I'll acknowledge a few as we go through the remarks. Bereaved parents, community leaders, business, education, public health communities, public officials, and law enforcement. Many of you in this room. Sometimes it must feel like you're pushing a boulder up a hill, but you are saving lives. Thank you for what you do. Today I want to talk about 3 approaches to this that I believe can help. First, we need to stop the flow of illegal guns into our city's neighborhoods. Last year and the year before that, the Chicago Police Department recovered more illegal guns than their counterparts in New York and Los Angeles combined. About 60% of the crime guns recovered in Chicago come from out of state, Indiana, the leading source. We can debate about what exactly our founding fathers meant with the Second Amendment to the Constitution, but we know this. When they wrote the words, a well-regulated militia, they weren't talking about 9-year-olds armed with 9mm semi-automatic handguns. Yet, those are the types of high-powered and easily trafficked firearms that are fueling the bloodshed in Chicago. As Supreme Court Justice Robert Jackson once said, the Constitution is not a suicide pact. I agree. We can respect the Constitution and do more to keep dangerous guns out of the hands of criminals and children. Here are a few of the things, and I salute the state legislators who are here today. Gun dealers in Illinois should have to obtain state licenses, follow common sense safety measures to keep people who shouldn't possess guns from acquiring them through straw purchasing. I support the efforts in Springfield and salute those who are here who do support it as well, to require reasonable safety measures. But no state, including Illinois, can stop the illegal flow of guns alone. Congress should toughen our weak federal laws to stop straw purchases and illegal gun trafficking. I've introduced a bipartisan bill with a stalwart and brave lady named Susan Collins of Maine and Senator Pat Leahy, a Democrat. Congress should also close the glaring gaps in FBI background checks that make it easy for convicted felons, terrorists, people with mental instability, and others to get handguns and other weapons. But let me be honest with you, Congress will not act. The National Gun Lobby has our Congress and our President cowered, and not even the most heinous slaughter of children in a classroom in Connecticut or the carnage on our streets is going to change that shameful political reality in Washington. As Superintendent Johnson reminded us, we can't just police our way out of this epidemic of violence. If we're going to ask young men to put down their guns, we need to offer them a chance at a better life, and that has to include a job. I'm glad to see Father Mike Pfleger here. As you know, he's spoken to this group before, and you certainly know him by reputation. He is my friend. You know that he's a pastor at St. Sabina's in Auburn, Gresham. About a year and a half ago, I got a message that he left for me. Father Pfleger wanted to tell me about a young man, 26 years old, a former gang member. This young man and Father Pfleger had an interesting history. Several years ago, the man had put out a hit on Father Pfleger for the trouble he was causing the gangs in his neighborhood. Sounds like Mike Pfleger, doesn't it? One day, that young man came to Father Pfleger and asked, "Will you help me? I want out. I don't want to live this way." Father Pfleger helped him. He enrolled him in a GED course, and he helped him get a job delivering pizza. A year later, January 2016, the young man was driving down the street with his grandmother when 2 gang members with an old beef walked up and shot him and his grandmother in the head. She survived, but he didn't. St. Sabina's was packed with gang members for that young man's funeral. Father Pfleger said the funeral mass. He asked the mourners this question: how many of you young brothers would like to give up this life? How many of you want to go to school and get a job? 150 men came up to the altar. Father Pfleger said, "I could find jobs for 3 or 4 of them. What about the rest? How can we help them?" Until we can answer that question, we won't end the cycle of killing, retaliation, and more killing in Chicago. Listen to the numbers that tell the story. In a recent report, 39% of young black and brown men in Chicago, 39% between the ages of 20 and 24, are not working and not in school. Remember that number, 39%. Nationwide, it's 25% of young African American and Latino men nationwide out of work, out of school. White men, 8%. Then the researchers looked at where the homicides occur in Chicago. They found 5 neighborhoods: Austin, Englewood, Back of the Yards, West Englewood, Grand Crossing. Those 5 neighborhoods account for about 8% of our city's population, but 32% of the murders. In those 5 neighborhoods, the jobless rates among young black and brown men range from 79 to 91%. Does anyone doubt there's a connection between lack of jobs and violence? The Mayor's One Summer Chicago program brought together government organizations, community groups, businesses, and others to provide summer jobs to 31,000 young people. I've seen them. They're transformative. For many of these young people, it's the first time in their lives they've ever had the responsibility of work. Many other organizations are also working, bringing jobs to the neighborhoods. If you're part of those efforts, thank you. A week after he took office, President Trump tweeted that he would, quote, send in the feds, close quote, if Chicago doesn't fix the carnage. I say, Mr. President, if you want to use the power of the federal government to help end violence in Chicago, we welcome your help. Send us federal dollars to revive our economically abandoned neighborhoods. Send us help for job training and apprenticeship programs. Help us close outrageous tax loopholes that pay companies to ship jobs overseas, and instead, let's have a tax code that rewards American companies, creating jobs for Americans with decent pay and benefits. Senator Sherrod Brown of Ohio and I have joined in introducing a bill to do just that. Jan Schakowsky is a sponsor in the House. I've also introduced a bill to expand tax credits for employers who hire at-risk youth, and another bill to make it easier for local governments and community organizations to apply directly for federal funds to support summer and year-round youth employment programs. I'm willing to meet with this president anytime, anywhere, if he wants to work to help create jobs and a more positive environment in this city. Now, the last proposal I want to give you, I think, is critically important and is often overlooked. If we are ever going to stop the bloodshed, we must learn to recognize and heal the deep wounds that violence and traumatic loss inflict on the minds of those exposed to it, especially the developing brains of children. A year ago, I went to the Cook County Juvenile Detention Center and spent the better part of a day meeting with those who were teenagers waiting for trial for having shot people, and talking to those who worked with them. Those who are waiting for trial don't come and go. They're there for long periods of time. There's a high school, there's gyms, there's programs, and counseling. And I said to the counselors at the Cook County Juvenile Detention Center, what do you find when you sit down with these largely men, young men? What's going on here? We find everything, Senator. We find bipolar. We find depression. We find it all. But in 92% of those who are waiting trial and come through this Cook County Juvenile Detention Center, we find the same thing. They have either been victims of violent trauma or exposed to violent trauma. Now, that is not a coincidence, my friends. It's a reality. Many have lost parents to addictions, incarceration, or death. They've grown up in poverty and chaos. They've lost friends, classmates, and family members to violence. Now, when I visit classrooms in the city and other places, I say, how many of you here have seen someone killed or had a close friend or family member murdered? More than half the hands shoot up in the classroom. Let me ask you, how many of you have seen someone you know or love murdered? If you have, you'll never forget it. How many of you worry every minute of every day that a stray bullet could come out of nowhere and end your life or the life of someone you love? And now ask yourself, what if you were 8 years old and just answered yes to both of those questions? Now, I went over to the Hines VA hospital and I was invited in for a counseling session for returning veterans. These returning veterans came back with PTSD, and they let me sit in on one of their sessions. And it was transformative to see them walk through the door, close the door on a Friday afternoon, and many of them break down in tears in front of me. They had gone through battle, and they were battling the wounds that they brought home with them. Think about that for a minute. These are former members of our military who were carefully screened before they were inducted They were trained extensively by professionals. They were sent into combat with careful supervision and support, and yet they come home in desperate need for support and counseling to heal their psychological wounds. How can we possibly believe that children who grow up surrounded by the daily threat of violence and loss can cope on their own or just outgrow these traumatic experiences? 20 years of research, the advent of MRIs and other brain scanning technology have given us definitive proof that exposure to violence and trauma dramatically affects kids. Experiencing repeated trauma leaves emotional scars that can last a lifetime, but literally change a child's brain chemistry. It can force children into a constant fight or flight mode. This can result in what can lead to emotional difficulties, developmental delays, and a variety of chronic health conditions, all factors that perpetuate the cycle of violence and poverty. We know, for example, that children who experience violence and traumatic loss are more likely to suffer serious asthma, panic, and flashback. They are more likely to suffer from depression and anxiety. They are also more likely to have trouble focusing and learning in school. A 2012 study of children in a Chicago neighborhood found that children who took reading or vocabulary tests shortly after a murder in the neighborhood performed dramatically worse, as though they had lost several years of academic progress compared with the students who were tested before the murder. Our lives are intertwined. A single bullet can ripple through a family and a community, shattering the fragile sense of safety and security that many of us take for granted, and leaving in its place grief and unimaginable loss and heartbreak. We now know that adults who experience trauma and violence as children are more likely to suffer from heart disease, stroke, diabetes, depression, addiction, lung disease, liver disease, and many other chronic conditions. They live sicker and die younger than people who don't grow up surrounded by stress and the threat of violence. It's important to stress that not all children who are exposed to trauma and violence will develop these problems or have these mental and physical challenges. And with proper care, many children who are harmed can be healed. But for too many children in violence-scarred neighborhoods, their biography becomes their biology. Here's the reason why. It's estimated that only 25% of the children in America who need mental health care actually receive it. Black and brown children, those most likely to experience this violence, are even less likely to receive the help they need to prevent trauma-related mental and physical difficulties. To put it another way, when it comes to gun violence in Chicago, sign me up for 1,000 cops, but sign me up as well for 1,000 counselors. We need them both. Now, here's the good news. The good news is there are many people in this room, and many I've met, who are showing us a path forward. Dr. Colleen Sacchetti, is she here? Well, her colleague is right here, though. She couldn't be. Tell her I mentioned her name. Colleen has an amazing staff at the Center for Childhood Resilience at Lurie Children's Hospital, and we've sat down many times to talk about their work. She came to Washington recently to brief congressional staff on the effects of violence and toxic stress. She has taken on the daunting task of educating a senator. She's done pretty well. She and her team at the Center for Childhood Resilience work with school districts all over our state, educating and training not just school professionals, but community health agencies, city leaders, and parents to recognize and help. A few months ago, I went over to Pilsen with her, and we went to a school there, all Hispanic kids. And they had decided to pick out of 1,200 kids, 4 that they could help. 4 out of 1,200. So naturally, they went to those that they thought needed help the most. A mother was there to tell me the story. A Hispanic lady, she told me the story that she had 2 little kids in the 1st and 3rd grade, and that 6 months before, her husband had walked into the living room where they were all sitting, took out a gun and killed himself in front of them. As a result of that experience, these kids started going through flashbacks, night terrors, and became withdrawn in class. They had no interest in anything. Their mother called one of the teachers and the teacher suggested that both of them be part of this program. Gradually, those little children opened up and talked about their grief, their fear, and their anger. The changes were profound. I met the kids afterwards. They didn't know the circumstances, why I was there and why I was meeting with them. Perfectly normal and happy kids who had been through that life-shattering experience. The mother said to us, when I look at what's happened to the kids, Senator, I'm going to get some counseling too. So we understand that folks are looking for help and need to find places to turn. Chicago has the knowledge and the leadership and the infrastructure to become a national leader in childhood trauma. We have an army of organizations that have made a difference. Under Mayor Emanuel and Chicago Public Health Commissioner Julie Morita, Chicago is working to become the largest trauma-informed city in America. We have a lot of people who desperately need their help. I've introduced a bill in the Senate to help make it happen. It's called the Trauma-Informed Care for Children and Families Act. My partners are Heidi Heitkamp of North Dakota and Al Franken of Minnesota, and in the House, Congressman Danny Davis. Danny knows the heartbreak of gun violence personally. Last year, his 15-year-old grandson was shot and killed by two teenagers arguing over shoes and clothes. Danny's heart is in this cause, and I couldn't ask for a better partner in this effort. The need in Chicago for trauma-informed care is staggering. A 2013 study conducted in Chicago neighborhoods with the greatest levels of violence found nearly 9 out of 10 kids aged 15 to 17 had been exposed to this kind of violence. 1 in 3 had lost a close friend or family member. 1 in 5 witnessed a murder firsthand. Yet few receive any mental health services at all. This bill is going to really try to build on innovation here and other places, educate and train adults who can help these young people, frontline people, expand Medicaid coverage of trauma-informed counseling and services to more schools, enable more kids to benefit from these curricula, and provide proven, innovative in-school mental health programs. Young people are 21 times more likely to go to a school clinic than to another clinic for care, and we want to make sure we're there to help them. Our bill is also going to enlist community leaders. Jay and Joy Luster, I met Jay in the course of my education on this subject, started a project called Calm Classrooms. Thousands of students in Chicago are taking advantage of that now. Mentors from the YMCA's Urban Warrior programs. My buddies like Wayne Gordon, Coach Wayne Gordon, sitting up here, like Mike Flager. He's been on the front lines of the battle for 42 years, am I right, Wayne, on that? He moved into Lawndale neighborhood, raised his family there, and never left. Wayne, thank you for all you've done with Mike Flager and so many others in the faith community. One of my friends went to Jerusalem and saw a program there dealing with trauma and violence and decided to bring it right back here. And let me give a shout out to Pastor Chris Harris at Bright Star Church in Bronzeville. Chris, thank you so much. We need to have the best practices that come out of these experiences and ones we learned from around the country to make this work even better. Making these changes are not going to break the bank. What it will do is make better use of the money that we are currently spending on the violence in this city. We're going to look at every federal program that reaches kids, from Head Start to home visits to health care, and make sure it includes strategies for identifying trauma. And you know what costs more than treating trauma? Ignoring it. It's been 2 decades since the first research showed us the link. Think how much money we could have saved in health costs if we'd have followed that lead. Center for Disease Control estimates that America spends $124 billion a year on health care for adult patients who have a history of early trauma. How many lives, how many billions of dollars a year might we save by treating childhood trauma to avoid the problem before it becomes worse? We know it costs a dramatic amount of money to incarcerate these young people. Wouldn't it be better to counsel them to avoid this? We have a lot of support. Our bill is endorsed by more than 100 national Chicago area organizations, from the American Academy of Pediatrics, the National Education Association, National Council of Juvenile and Family Courts. But the most powerful endorsements for trauma-informed care may come from 2 young men from Englewood. Deshaun Hanna and Dantrell Blake are cousins. Deshaun is 20. Dantrell will turn 21 this month. Both men were shot in separate incidents, months apart in 2015. Dantrell still has a bullet in his leg. But the cousins caught a break that changed their lives. When Dantrell went back to Stroger Hospital for a follow-up, and let me thank you, Tony Preckwinkle, for Stroger Hospital and the great work that you do every single day there. Give her a round of applause. So when Dantrell went back to Stroger, he ran into a woman named Artesia Williams. Artesia was an intern then for a small nonprofit called Healing Hurt People in Chicago that works with young victims of violence. She convinced Deshaun and Trell to go back and finish high school. Then she persuaded them to get involved with Project FIRE an amazing program that uses glass blowing and therapy to heal the scars of violence and help young men chart a new course for their lives. Before they met Artesia, Deshawn and Dantrell had never thought about going to college. Today, between them, they've been accepted at 5 colleges and they're weighing their options. They are also working as peer counselors at Healing Hurt People, helping other young men who've been shot and lost friends and family members to violence. And they're helping to teach doctors and other health professionals how to recognize and heal the psychic wounds that violence inflicts. Somehow, even with all these demands, they were able to join us today. Ladies and gentlemen, a hand for Deshawn Hanna, Dantrell Blake, and their caseworker, Artesia Williams. There's a lot of hurt in this city, but there's a lot of hope, too. I hope you'll ask yourself, well, what can I do about this? What can I do to make Chicago a national leader in healing childhood trauma? Statues of Confederate leaders reflect painful racial wounds from our history, but many deep and painful racial disparities continue to wound us today. Voter suppression, lack of jobs, traumatized kids and communities. We've got to come together to heal our communities. There are things we can do. Defend voting rights, work for more jobs, be an advocate for change, including trauma-informed care for children, be a mentor for kids who need an adult to trust. If you're part of the corporate community and stepped up, thank you. If you haven't, please consider it. There are some great employers in our city who are hiring and training young men and women from violence-scarred neighborhoods. If you talk to them, they will tell you these young kids are some of the most resilient and determined workers they have. But frankly, not enough businesses are getting involved yet. We need your help. In closing, let me leave you with some words of hope from one of America's great poets, Maya Angelou. Here's what she wrote. History, despite its wrenching pain, cannot be unlived, and if faced with courage, need not be lived again. Thanks for inviting me. I'll take some questions.
Thank you very much, Senator Durbin. And if anybody back there in the audience has questions, if you would just hold up your blue card, members of our staff will come by and pick them up, and we'll try to answer, the senator will try to answer as many of the questions as we can. So thank you. I'd like to recognize my congressman, Congressman Danny Davis, who just joined us. This is like a triple header today. I've got my U.S. Senator, my Congressman, and my Alderman. Boy, unbelievable. Okay.
Reverse order of importance.
Remember, all politics are local. Okay. This is from Mike Bauer, sitting over here, City Club member. What do you think of the proposed acquisition by Sinclair Broadcasting of Tribune Media? Do you expect the acquisition to be completed?
Mike, I don't know what we'll have to say about that in terms of their acquisition. I'm familiar with Sinclair. It is a very, I'm being kind now, very conservative operation. They used to put editorial comments when they owned the Springfield, Illinois station on with regularity, and I would demand and occasionally get the opportunity for a rebuttal. It is hard for me to imagine that kind of operation taking over WGN. It just seems like such a hometown radio station that has, just deep roots in Chicago history. It's hard to imagine outsiders coming in. We've seen some great dislocations already with the Tribune, Sun-Times, and other things. But I worry about it. I worry about the change of the approach at this station.
Okay, thank you. Ooh, a lot of questions. Great.
Ask them faster.
Okay, Charlie Gardner, Roosevelt University trustee. Do Democrats have a chance to recapture the Senate in 2018?
Right now, it's 48 Democrats, 52 Republicans. There are 25 Democrats who are up for re-election, 9 Republicans. So the numbers are not in our favor. Out of those 25 Democrats, there are many in states that Donald Trump carried. Now, historically, except with one exception, off-year elections have not been kind to a president's party, and the other party has picked up seats in the House and the Senate. And so maybe, just maybe, we may pick up some seats, but there are only 2 hot possibilities. If you look at the 9 Republican seats, and that would be Nevada and Arizona at this point, way too early to tell how that's going to work out. I actually think that the House of Representatives, U.S. House of Representatives, may be as likely or more likely to turn. And there are lots of candidates running. In some of the Republican districts in the state, there are as many as 8 different Democrats who are vying for the nomination. So there's a lot of interest that came out of the Trump election on the Democratic side at grassroots. It could be a fascinating election.
Okay, thank you, Senator. This is from Paul Singer. He's not a City Club member. Paul, remember, we'll ask your question this time. We expect you to join. He's a liberal Democratic voter. Can President Trump shut down the federal government if Congress does not fund the wall?
I doubt that that's what's going to happen. And although he is adamant that he wants to see that big, beautiful wall built and paid for by the Mexicans some way or another, I doubt that that'll happen. And the reason I say that is I believe that we've been through this scenario a few months ago when we had to finish the budget for this fiscal year, and the Republicans now in control in the House and the Senate do not want to carry the burden of having shut down the government on their watch for any reason. So we face 2 critical votes right away. One of them is on the budget for the next year, which may be delayed a little bit, but even more compelling is the extension of the national debt, which if we do not do, will have the same impact of shutting down the government and our economy. I just don't think the Republican leaders or the president want that to happen on their watch.
Okay, thank you. This is from City Club member Joe Annette with Siena. Senator, where do you propose the funding will come from to support the necessary increase in mental health therapies?
Well, I can tell you first, we need to have a health care system that provides mental health services through health insurance in America. Members of the Senate and Congress where I've served have the most passion, or the most effective, when they're dealing with an issue that touches them personally. So there was a time when Paul Wellstone of Minnesota, with a brother who suffered from mental illness, and Pete Domenici, conservative Republican of New Mexico, had a son who suffered from mental illness, and the 2 of them teamed up and for years kept beating the insurance industry, saying you've got to absolutely include mental health services with other services in health insurance, and they finally won it. And we put it in the Affordable Care Act. And it makes a big difference for the vast majority of people like us, most of us in this room, who have health insurance through our employers. So you start there, but it's not enough. You've got to make sure that Medicaid, which is serving many of the lower income populations, has access to good mental health services too, which means that community clinics have to offer behavioral health. More and more are doing that, but we have to keep the funding going. We are hanging by a thread now as to what's going to happen to America's healthcare system. The president has said, let it sink, let it go under, and let the Democrats crawl on their knees and beg us to fix it. I hope that doesn't happen, because throughout that, the president and members of Congress will still have their health insurance. And the people across America will pay a heavy price. The good news is Lamar Alexander, Republican of Tennessee, Patty Murray, Democrat of Washington, are going to start hearings as soon as we return in a couple weeks on what to do with the health care system to strengthen it and move it forward. Incidentally, that's where we should have started 7 months ago.
Thank you very much. Shifting gears a little, this is a question from Steve Schlickman, who bills himself as a transportation consultant. He is a very good one, by the way. Senator, is there hope for broad partisanship in the Senate? And what does that mean for an infrastructure initiative?
Steve, everybody cheers $1 trillion infrastructure program. I mean, it's easy to explain. You look at China and what they're doing, other countries, and what we need in this state and country, and you know it better than most. The problem is, how do you fund it? How do you fund it? We haven't touched the federal gas tax in, what, 15, 18 years? It's a gas that's a tax that's imposed by the gallon, and as we drive more fuel-efficient cars and trucks, burn fewer gallons, less money comes into the Highway Trust Fund, though we still have potholes and need to build new infrastructure. So the funding mechanism is easier on my side of the aisle than it is on the other side of the aisle, but that is crucial. Let me just add one footnote. We are now moving toward more and more electric vehicles. We're going to see more of that being done. And as a consequence, fewer gallons of gas are likely to be burned. How are we then going to fund the infrastructure of this country? It really calls out for some new calculation. Instead of by the gallon, maybe it's by the mile. Something that reflects the real use of the highway and reinvest back into it. I think that's the only way, but the funding is the thing that's going to stop us.
Okay, thank you. This question is from Tim Egan, committeeman of Brian Hopkins' 2nd Ward and CEO of the New Roseland Hospital. Is Trump Care dead, and what can we expect to see in the coming months?
I've been in the House and the Senate for a long time, and thank you for those of you who helped me have this public career. And I've seen a lot of votes. Half a dozen of those votes fit into the category of things like war. When you're voting about whether or not you're going to go to war, if you're not lying awake rolling back and forth at night, then you're not thinking, because lives will be lost one way or the other on that vote. So you'll always remember those votes. And there are votes you remember because that's your bill, my bill to ban smoking on airplanes, my bill to do this and that and the other thing. Boy, you're on top of that and remember it for a lifetime. But then there are a handful of other votes that occur that don't fit in those categories that you'll never forget. And the vote on Trump Care at 2:30 in the morning on the floor of the Senate just a few weeks ago was one of those. When I saw John McCain come through those Senate doors and walk up to the desk on the Republican side and lift his shoulder as far as he can, shattered in that plane crash and torture, and say no, that was the end of Trump Care, thanks to Collins, Murkowski, and McCain who stepped forward. But it wasn't the answer to what we do with our current health care system. I voted for the Affordable Care Act. I believe in it. I've said on the floor, and I'll say to you, if you have ever been the father of a seriously ill child and you have no health insurance, you'll never forget it as long as you live. I know, I've been there. I don't want anybody else to be there. So I voted for the Affordable Care Act. We reduced the number of uninsured by 50% in Illinois and virtually nationwide, but it's not perfect. The individual marketplace premiums are way too high because the older and sicker people are signing up and the younger, healthier ones are not. We got to fix that. Secondly, there's nothing, absolutely nothing, in the Affordable Care Act to deal with the cost of prescription drugs. It's breaking the bank. Blue Cross Blue Shield pays more out each year on prescription drugs than they do for inpatient hospital care. Go figure. It has reached the point there is no control in terms of the rise in prices. Things we have to do to make this health care system work. If Trump Care is not going to pass, we've got to get something that moves forward on a bipartisan basis.
Thank you very much. Our weekly Armenian-American question from Laura Tarosian. Senator, please tell us your thoughts on initiating impeachment and what cause requires. Told you we'd have some zingers.
Impeachment is initiated in the House of Representatives. And should it occur, and I've been through one of them, I will be a member of the jury in the Senate. So it's probably best that I leave it there.
Very good. This is from Don Schollenberger with Baird and Warner. You indicated your Democratic House co-chairs. Why have you not tried to involve Republican co-chairs in the House? For example, Adam Kinzinger, Rodney Davis, Peter Roskam, or Randy Hultgren, all, of course, representatives from the state of Illinois.
I'm certainly working on the Senate side first. And as I mentioned, Senator Collins is a co-sponsor of the gun bill that I mentioned to you. And I have so many bipartisan bills. Lindsey Graham and I just introduced the DREAM Act, which some of you are aware of when it comes to immigration. And I also, my co-sponsor on criminal justice reform is Chuck Grassley of Iowa. Turbin and Grassley, what's that all about? But I really try because I can count. You know, they're in the majority. I need them. They need me, maybe. But I need them and their votes. So I am not averse to having Republican co-sponsorship and support. Danny over here will tell you that many of the issues he and I care about a lot don't excite our Republican friends as much, but we're going to keep asking, aren't we? You bet we will.
Okay. While you're gathering your thoughts, Senator, this is a compliment, so let's work this in. From Susan Hayes Gordon from Lurie Children's Hospital. Thank you for your integrity and your steadfast leadership over so many years. working to serve humanity and our nation. We need you especially now in these very difficult times. Thank you. Well, here's a question. Even though we have limited time, we could probably go on for hours. This is from Kay Kamen with Sutton Place Financial. Can you add any clarity to what's going on in Washington?
So here is, I'm going to give you two numbers to give you an idea of where America is today. Roughly 2/3 of the American people have said in a poll that they're embarrassed by the president. 2/3 of identified Republican voters say they haven't seen anything wrong yet. Listen to what I've just said and the dichotomy between the general population and the Republican primary voters. And many Republican senators, some Republican senators have said to me, it's hard back home because my Republican primary voters are still very loyal to the president. And I know that colors their decision about whether to speak out. That is part of the reality that we face. In the meantime, I would have to say this president comes to the office with virtually no government or political experience and does not have a team that reflects any experience on Capitol Hill. I might be able to remember if I think hard enough, but I can't tell you the congressional liaison for this president. I don't know the person very well. And you can't be effective in leading forward an agenda, whatever it may be, without having somebody who understands how the Hill works and to have loyal people working with you in your own party. What the president has said about Mitch McConnell makes it kind of hard for him to work with him in the future, and I understand they haven't spoken to one another for a few weeks. So that's part of the reason that things are not moving very quickly.
Okay. We have two last questions. The first one is, do you feel that the present governor of Illinois is beatable?
Regardless of how I feel, the numbers say he is. You can ask Senator Harman, Senator Hutchison, and others who are here. His numbers are not very good in the state at this moment. I will just say this generically. I've spent a better part of my adult life working for this state, and I am honored to do it. It's a great honor to do it. I am heartbroken of what I've seen occur in the last 2.5 years in our state. There are things that have happened around our state which will take more than a decade to repair that have happened in the last few years. The city of Carbondale, Illinois, they were blessed with this eclipse and all the tourists who came down for a few days. But Southern Illinois University Carbondale went from an enrollment of 23,000 to 16,000. They had more students transferring out of SIU Carbondale to Kentucky and Missouri and Indiana schools than they ever have in history because of the uncertainty of the state budget. The city of Carbondale, Mike Henry's the mayor, Republican businessman, nice guy who supports me in some crazy way, says to me, we've had 50 real estate closings in Carbondale as of a few months ago. We have 250 properties for sale. The biggest driver of the economy is the university, and there's doubt about whether it's going to be there for the students. I go to Black Hawk College over at Quad Cities just yesterday and talked to the fellow in charge of admissions. He says the students here would rather go to school in Iowa because they think there's more certainty that they'll be able to finish and the state will provide whatever assistance they can provide to them than here. The damage that's been done to Illinois in the last 2.5 years is self-inflicted. This is not some great devastation that came our way at the hand of God. It is something that we have been party to and we've got to do something about. And I will just add, to think that we are even questioning whether we're going to open the schools of Illinois on time after all this is shameful. It's disgraceful. And I'll say one last thing. And this may be more political than it should be, but I'm going to say it anyway. It is beneath the dignity of a leader of the state of Illinois to pit one region of this state against another. We are one state, and we should be treated as such. My father was born in deep southern Illinois. I was born in East St. Louis and raised my son Paul and our other kids in downstate Illinois. I'm proud of it. Proud of it. Yes. But having said that, I am equally proud to represent this great city. It is a fantastic place. My wife and I spend every moment we can here great restaurants and everything that goes with it, and they're great people. And to think that we would have to choose or pit one against another is something beneath the dignity of a public office. Yeah.
So, Senator, speaking of great restaurants, have you eaten at that State Lodge down in southern Illinois where you get that fried chicken dinner for $12.99? You can't even get that at MacArthur's on the west side. Okay, one last question. Your colleague, Mitch McConnell, any thoughts about Mitch and his relationship to the president?
Well, it's not very good. And the president's been very public about that. I think Senator McConnell made a mistake the day after we swore in the new Senate by announcing he was going to something called reconciliation. Now, that's total inside baseball for most of you. But what it basically means is he does not want to take it through the regular order of business, any issue. Anything he can, he's going to move through a reconciliation process, which basically says no committee hearings, no amendments, take it to the floor, and a simple majority passes. Well, he has 52 votes. So he doesn't want to get into the world of 60 votes. By doing that, he has really, unfortunately, put us in a position on the healthcare system where we're bringing a measure before us for a vote to change the healthcare system and 1/6 of the economy of America that no one has read and no one could possibly understand. And that's why it fell apart. That's why his own 3 members of his own party would not support it. I hope Senator McConnell will call Senator Schumer or any of us and say basically, all right, I'll take a flyer at the regular order of business. Let's see how this works. Let's see if we can do it together. Put us on the spot. We should be doing it together. I think you've elected us as Democrats and Republicans to solve problems together. And that means that Durbin has to compromise and maybe McConnell has to compromise. But isn't that what it's all about at the end of the day? That we do the best we can and get the most done that we can. So I'm still honored to serve, although I have to tell you this last year has been very unusual in the United States Senate and likely to contend. City Club, thanks.
Only.
The Illinois Channel salutes our advisory council members, leaders in business, education, law, medicine, and other fields from across Illinois.
Anyone who drives across Illinois will guess that agriculture is our #1 industry. In fact, agriculture accounts for 1 in 7 jobs in the state of Illinois, and the grain and feed industry contributes over $10 billion annually to the state's economy. Hi, I'm Jeff Adkisson, Executive Vice President of the Grain and Feed Association of Illinois. The fields of corn and soybeans and grain elevators and feed mills that dot our landscape are all part of a vast interconnected system of commerce that employ tens and thousands of your fellow citizens. But like most businessmen, our members are concerned with issues such as taxes, government regulations, fuel costs, and environmental concerns. That's why the Grain and Feed Association of Illinois works to communicate our concerns on those issues to the people in government who write our laws. With so many jobs at stake, it's important for us to keep the lines of communication open between those in agriculture and those in government. That's also why the Grain and Feed Association of Illinois supports the work of the Illinois Channel. Its coverage connects all of us to events at the state capitol, like coverage of the Senate and the House Agriculture Committee hearings, as well as other public policy events that occur throughout the state of Illinois. We all need to stay connected to the events and the issues in Illinois, whether we live in the rural communities or in our largest cities. And that's what we get from the Illinois Channel. The Illinois Channel, it works for all of us.
Next, from Springfield, we talked to Senator John Curran of Downers Grove, who was recently selected to replace Senator Christine Radogno following the Senate Minority Leader's resignation.
Senator John Curran, thanks for joining us for the first time on the Illinois Channel. You're a brand new member of the legislature. You replaced Senator Christine Radogno when she left, and we wanted to talk to you, just get a little bit of idea of who you are and what's your background and how you came to be a part of the Illinois State Senate.
Well, thank you. It's very nice to be here. I am served on my county board in DuPage County for 9 years, the last 6 years as vice chairman of the board, and at the same time I've been an assistant state's attorney for 19 years in the Cook County State's Attorney's Office, both as a criminal prosecutor and as an attorney on the civil side as well.
With both the background in local government and as a prosecutor, are there certain areas that you want to focus your attention on as far as the issues?
Well, certainly making government operate more efficiently and streamlining operations, at the same time looking for ways to reduce cost and burden on the taxpayers that we represent.
How about in the area of criminal law? Is there anything that comes to mind that is of particular interest? Or if not, how do you see your background as a prosecutor, that experience being applied when you're sitting, say, in committee or considering different bills?
Well, certainly right now we're in an age of, there's a lot on the table in terms of criminal justice reform and how we approach the criminal justice system and through the court system. So I think my background and experience will aid me very well in representing my district, the 41st District, as these issues come forward.
And with your background having been on the county board, how does that apply itself? I mean, we have certain issues that come up. The administration has talked about or tried to hold back the distributed fund, the local governments and things like that. Any number of local issues, obviously, that come up. So your background, I would think, would be applicable, having served in local government.
I think so. Also, we're looking at relief from unfunded mandates. My time in the county board, that was a constant drumbeat from Springfield. Additional mandates regarding DuPage County, additional cost drivers that didn't have any funding mechanism attached to them. So I think when we're looking to bring down cost at the local level, we also need to look at ways that we can alleviate some of the mandates that have been passed down from Springfield to the local level in assisting in bringing down costs.
As we are here at an odd time, what was it that, how did you happen to come to the Illinois Senate? I mean, I know you were appointed on a temporary basis, but what was it that you decided this is something you wanted to do?
We're at a critical juncture right now in the state of Illinois as we're looking to reform government, reform state operations, and control costs going forward as we begin to dig out of this massive amount of debt that the state has accumulated over the last several years, well, over decades, really. So I believe I bring that type of background from DuPage County, streamlining operations, and looking to do the same here for the state of Illinois.
You were here the other day, and I know you had your wife and children here. What is it, 3 girls?
4 girls. Yes, 4 daughters. We had a great day. They were here when I got sworn in. Spent the day session, everyone, meeting a whole lot of people. We spent some time with the governor, meeting with him in his office. My kids got to quiz him a little bit on state government, so he was so gracious. We just had a wonderful day here.
Senator Curran, I'm sure maybe we'll have a chance to follow up with you and as the months go by as far as some of the issues, but we appreciate you joining us and welcome to the Illinois State Senate.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Next, from Springfield, Lenny Jarrett, the project manager for the Center for Transforming Education at the Heartland Institute, explains why his organization is in favor of the SB1 school funding formula reform bill. This runs about 15 minutes.
Lenny Jarrett, thanks for joining us on the Illnois Channel. You are with the Heartland Institute. We're here at the state capitol, and we're here surprisingly on a day when the House of Representatives is in the middle of August, which is normally not the case. They're going to be looking at SB1, the education funding reform, that as we tape this, the Senate just overrode the governor's veto of that bill. On the question of education, you at the Heartland Institute have a little bit of a different take, and what can you tell us about it and why you think that this will be a positive thing for students in Illinois?
Well, Heartland's been around for 34 years, and one of their main issues has always been educational choice. And our feeling at the Heartland is the more competition you can bring to education, the better you can meet the needs of children. Every children learns differently, they study differently, how they work. And so if you can provide them with an option instead of a one-size-fits-all system, that each one can find the educational needs that fit them personally.
And the way you're, one of the things that we wanted to talk about is the use of people making donations and taking tax credits so that there are scholarships privately funded.
Right, correct. Right, tax credit scholarships are private funds. So individuals, and I'm not sure about Illinois, the Invest in Kids Act, whether it's going to include corporations or not. Many states do, and they donate to a scholarship management organization who then runs these scholarships and hands out scholarship to kids to be able to go to a private school, even religious schools, and even to other public schools in other districts. But it gives them that ability to go what best fits their need. And none of this money is state money, so it doesn't cost the state any money to actually provide this.
Yeah, when we talk about, people would be familiar with vouchers, this is not a voucher, because with the voucher we're using the state monies.
Correct.
And that's where a lot of times school districts will say that's taking money away from us and undercutting our financial penny. This is not that because it's private donation.
Correct. And yeah, vouchers, Illinois has what's called a Blaine Amendment, which is an amendment to prevent any money from going to religious schools, for state money from going to religious schools. So that is unconstitutional in Illinois, so you can't do a voucher. But a tax credit scholarship, like we said, is all private donations, and none of it runs through the state, and it allows anybody to help with education that wants to help with it. So it's different than a voucher because there's no state funds.
So why are we here at the state capitol if we're using private money? Why do you need the state?
Well, you need the state because the state needs to pass that tax credit. Right now, there are some private scholarships that go around and stuff, but they all just run through charitable donations. So the incentive for more people to actually just help fund education, the tax credit is a better incentive because typically in most states it's a dollar for dollar credit for your tax liability.
And what, have you already talked to lawmakers on this, and what kind of reception are you getting?
Well, we actually sent them we did a little policy brief last week, just kind of outlining what tax credit scholarships are, what they do, how they work, how they've worked in other states, and sent that to multiple state reps here in Illinois. One of them has asked us to come and testify when they do a hearing on tax credit scholarships. So it's a popular idea. It's been moving around. There was actually an article just recently about Governor Rauner and Mike Madigan both interested in the idea of tax credit scholarships.
Let me go back to whether or not it hurts school districts. If the student leaves a district and goes to a private school, is there any diminishment of funding for that district?
No, not the way the tax credit scholarships work. They don't have the student to teach anymore.
But I mean, the way the state funding works for the district, are they paying based upon per pupil, or do they how do they assess how much money district ABC gets?
They have, it's a very complicated formula. That's why you're having all the debate about it. But the way the formula works, there is some money that goes regardless because there's the set cost, and then there is some per student funding based on the attendance at a given time in the district.
Right.
So there is some there, but all the local money stays. So in essence, you're actually increasing the per student funding if a student leaves because you no longer have to educate that child, but you've still got all the other monies coming in because of the local funding that actually increases the average. It's a small increase, but it's an average. It's still there.
You wouldn't have, but that sounds like an arguable point. I mean, if the district loses some money because, I mean, depending upon how much money is raised privately, and I want to get to that, but if, let's say we raised a boatload of money privately, and various districts had 1,000 or 2,000 kids leave, then it would have some economic impact on that.
Well, if you look at the studies, though, it hasn't. It's actually saved states money, so they have more money that they can put into education. They can increase the per student funding. It's actually saved from, since tax credit scholarships came in, the top 10 programs, which covers 93% of students around the country, has actually saved states $1.7 to $3.4 billion. Put it in a per student funding, that's about $1,650 to right around $3,000 per student and over time. So it's saving the state's money that they can then use for increasing education or using other things. So there may not be a diminishment. It's up to the state what they do with that extra money they have from the savings.
Has this been tried in other states, and to what extent has it raised, what kind of money has it raised? Because if it only raises $100,000 or something,
Yeah.
we're not really going to accomplish a lot.
No, every state that's done it, basically, they raise the money that they need typically within hours to a few days. Florida's the biggest. Florida has an auto escalation where if they hit 90%, it'll automatically increase by 20% the next year. They're now raising over $550 million for their tax credit scholarships, and they have over 100,000 students receiving those tax credit scholarships. They're by far the largest. Arizona's been the longest running, and they've had their tax credit scholarship for over 20 years now. So it's working in other states, and it's not diminishing the money going to education.
And I think you would argue, rather than having this debate about vouchers, which has been going on for decades, this is kind of a middle ground where we're using private funds. And yet, for those kids who are stuck in a underperforming school,
right,
and we have any number of those, especially often in the inner city,
yes.
That rather than just writing their future off, it's a rope to kind of give them a way out to go to some other school, I presume in their area, but it wouldn't necessarily have to be in their area.
It's up to them. I mean, it really is up to them. If they have the transportation, they could go further. It really is up to the parent at that point. But if you look at the nation's report cards or the NAEP scores, only 37% of fourth graders are proficient in math, and only 32% in reading. In math, in 8th grade. In reading, it's basically 35% are proficient in both 4th grade and 8th grade. So we're failing. Over 60% of our kids are not being proficient even by the time they get to 8th grade right now. So there's got to be a change, and that's why we advocate a lot, is focus on the student instead of focusing on the districts.
Is this the first effort by the Heartland Institute to have this tax credit passed in Illinois?
No, actually, back in the early 90s, there was actually the Illinois plan where they actually wrote up a whole consecutive plan about how to fund it. That was more based on education savings accounts, which is a little bit different than this. I think that included a little bit of tax credit scholarships, so it's something Heartland's been working on for decades here in Illinois.
An education saving account, the money would actually most likely come from the parent, right? And then where they would set it aside for Junior or Sally or whatever. But here, I mean, the problem with that might be that you have a parent that doesn't have any excess money to set aside,
right.
Where here you can get any number of people can donate 5, 10, or $1 million, I suppose.
Right. Well, some of the ESA plans that are the ones that are set up now actually include state money. So the state actually funds a personal account for the parent, then directs that for the education. So that does actually involve state money as well in those education savings accounts plan. And there's 6 states with education savings accounts plans now.
And how many with the tax credit plan that we're talking about?
17 states are using that already.
And for how long, and have we seen any results in the test scores of the state, of the students in those states?
Yes, Arizona's been the longest. They've been about 2 decades now. They've been using a tax credit scholarship. They also have an ESA. They have a wide range of school choice programs, and their results have increased dramatically. They're now battling Massachusetts for the top education state in the entire country now. Florida's starting to see it, especially with a lot of their programs are more geared towards special needs. And you've started to see how it's really helping the special needs kids in Florida, and several other states have started the same way.
When we say it saves the state's money, and I've just been around here to know people play games with numbers.
Yes.
Would we see that in actual, reflected in the state budget? When you, let's say it was $1 billion save, would we see that education funding went from $4 billion to $3 billion, just as an example?
Actually, probably not, because most likely what would happen is the state would continue to fund education at the same level they are now. Until you have a large amount of students that are actually doing that, it really isn't going to change the education budget. What it's going to do is allow them more flexibility to put more money and not be the drain on the revenue, trying to increase it as fast, is really the way it's worked in other states.
I see, and of course, then that would also address some of the things we often hear teachers, unions and all talk about is the class size
making them smaller, that would make
Right.
the class sizes smaller.
Yeah, it potentially does, yes.
So, right now, where we stand, you're here trying to get this, the lawmakers kind of up to speed on what the issues are, just as we're doing
Yes.
this interview. And how is it being received, and when would a bill be introduced to make this happen?
Well, I'm not sure the timing on how everything, I think it's going to come rather quickly here before long. And yeah, our goal is really to educate the legislators on how a tax credit scholarship works, the results in other states, what the impact, economic impact could be, what the impact on children would be, more so than trying to tell them this is how you design the program and this you should pass this. We're not telling them that. We just want to educate them on best practices, that what other states have seen the results and stuff in.
And lastly, the legislature, as everyone knows, is run by Democrats. Democrats in the Heartland Institute typically don't agree on things. What kind of reception are you getting from the Democratic leadership?
Actually, our Heartland is bipartisan around the country. Illinois is a little different than a lot of states, but we have bipartisan support around the country. We have an emerging
How about
issues
in
forum.
Illinois?
I believe we have some members of our legislative forum are both Democrats and Republicans. Yes, we have more Republicans as members than Democrats, but it is bipartisan, and we do have Democrats that are on board and working with us at times and helping us, that we try to mutually work with them on issues that we agree with.
Yeah, no criticism intended, just a Heartland's more
Right.
a free market kind of a thing.
Yes, we definitely are more free market, absolutely.
And for those who aren't financially literate, just briefly, what is the difference between a tax credit versus a tax deduction?
A tax deduction, you only get a percentage of that off on your taxes, so it comes off pre-tax as part of your calculating your tax liability. A tax credit comes after you've already calculated your tax liability, and it's typically a dollar for dollar. With the tax credit scholarship, some states limit that to 80%. It can never be more than your tax liability. They never give you back a refund on those, how most of them work. But it's after your tax liability is calculated, then it's basically a dollar for dollar credit off of your tax liability.
And what I would tell people, you can see, just to make this even a little simpler, if someone owes $1,000 in taxes and you're at the 20% tax bracket, I'm just making some numbers up for illustration purposes, your tax on $1,000 would be $200. Whereas if you got a tax credit, you could save the whole $1,000.
Correct.
Say dollar for dollar.
Right. If you had donated $200 to a scholarship management organization, that whole $200 would then be, your tax liability would go to zero.
Elaine, Jarrett, we appreciate you joining.
Thank you, Terry.
The Illinois Channel salutes our advisory council members.
Hello, I'm Michael Jacoby, Executive Director of the Illinois Association of School Business Officials. Most people never look at a school and think of it being an economic enterprise that spends tens of millions of dollars every year. They look at the school as a place their children attend for education, or perhaps as a place to attend a local sporting event. But handling the business of education is the job of the school business officials. We're the ones that keep track of the millions of dollars that come in and go out. Our members face a myriad of issues that include financing new buildings, paying teachers and staff, tracking our pension costs, and supervising the many businesses that contract with local schools. And that's why I'm so happy to serve on the Illinois Channel Advisory Council. The Illinois Channel connects us with legislators working on educational issues in the state capitol, as well as covering educational issues being discussed at conferences around the state. As we see in the debate over pensions, the many details involved in just that one issue, we need a news organization that's willing to give enough time to cover an important issue in depth. I'm Michael Jacoby, Executive Director of the Illinois Association of School Business Officials. I'm also proud to serve on the Illinois Channel's Advisory Council. The Illinois Channel, it keeps us connected to the issues that matter most.